I'm going to start with the strokes tool, and if I click outside the model and drag, I will get a straight line. And if I click on the surface, I can draw on the model. And you can see that we've drawn around and through the surface of the model. That's okay, I'm just going to ignore it. I'm going to continue to add some more strokes, and I'm done. You'll notice that it's put strokes all the way through, so it's kind of wrapped around the model. And when I press enter, it creates the topology for me. The points and faces tool works by, if I left click, it will add the points and it will place them on the surface of the high poly. And if I hover, it will show me a preview of where it's going to place the quad. And I right click to confirm. And as you can see, it makes going around this eye socket fairly quick and simple. The next tool is quads. This has 4 different mode types, and I'm using this in direct mode to begin with. So the first thing I will need to do is I will use the move tool to basically make the quad a little bit squarer by making it wider. With the leading edge set to the right size, I can just quickly drag and click to add the new geometry. I can change direction by selecting a different edge, and this will allow me to go around the side of the skull. And then to join it up, I just need to select an edge from existing geometry. Filling in with the quad tool is also fairly easy. Select an edge and it will be biased to snapping to existing vertices. It's not unusual to be left with a triangle at this stage, and I tend not to worry too much about them. Split rings is good for subdividing part of the existing geometry. And once you've done that, again, you'll want to use the move tool or the brush tool to rearrange the UVs so that you've got fairly even spacing when it comes to the geometry. I tend to work with low resolution meshes. I find this quite quick. And then when I'm ready, I will subdivide the layer. And when the layer is subdivided, the new geometry will snap to the high poly. I tend to use the brush tool for rough cleanup. The collapse tool is useful when you need to clean up and reduce the triangle density. The delete edge tool can be used to either delete a single edge or an entire loop. If you want to delete a loop, you need to hold down the control key. And if you delete a single edge, you will probably be left with an n-gon. The move tool can be used to weld vertices together. So if I select a vert and move it over one that's existing, it will be welded. I'm going to use the move tool to move these vertices that have snapped to the wrong part of the high poly mesh. I'm going to use the delete edges to reduce the complexity around the eye socket. I'm going to use symmetry to generate the other side of the skull. Then I'm just going to move the verts over and they will snap to the center. I'm going to do a little bit clean up here. I'm going to delete these polys and then I'm going to rearrange them with the quad tool. The nasal cavity on this skull is quite deep, and it can be quite difficult to arrange the geometry when it's snapping to the high poly. So what I like to do is to build a very low poly over the hole, and I do this on a separate layer. Then I can subdivide that layer and then select all of the faces and then merge them into the original layer. So the subdivision hasn't worked well because of the depth of the cavity. So I'll need to go in and move these verts around, which can also be pretty tricky because of the symmetry. So I need to find where they are and just adjust them. I'm going to use the split ring to add more geometry. And this will help the polygon density match that of the other layer. With the nose layer selected, I'm going to select all the faces in that layer. Then I'm going to select my base layer and I'm going to move them all into that retopology layer. Everything's now in group 1 and there is nothing in the nose group, so I will delete it. I'm going to delete the faces that I know I'm not going to need, and I'm going to delete them from the nose group. Then I can switch to move mode and just join the verts together. And finally, I'll add in those missing faces. Let's just speed through the modelling of the underside of the skull. Sometimes you want to split, but you don't want to split the entire ring. And I find the easy way to fix this is to just delete one of the polygons. So here is a typical problem where I've failed to provide enough triangle resolution and it hasn't captured one of the significant details of the skull. To fix this problem, what I do is I delete the polygon and then I'm going to add a new quad on the feature, and then I'm just going to build around to create new quads. I'm building with quads in direct mode. Then I get to this spot and it stops working for me. So I try the trapezoid mode, and then finally settle using the 2-click mode, which is very robust, but it is a little more time consuming. With the skull complete in terms of the topology, I'm ready to start the UV unwrap. I have my edge loops tool selected, and when I look at the UV preview, I immediately notice that I have a triangle missing. So this is quite useful so that you can spot when you have missing geometry. So with that quick fix, I'm just going to check over the UVs, and what I'm trying to do is look for areas where there might be problems, where it's either too dense, like around here, or where it appears to be overlapping. The first edge loop I'm going to select is around the eye socket, and you'll notice that the faces inside the eye socket change colour, and that indicates that they're on a separate UV island. And we can see now we have a UV island for the skull and one for the eye socket. I'm going to break this short edge on the bridge of the nose. Then I'm going to come along the cheekbone and remove the upper jaw. Again, you can see that 3dcoat color coats the islands and unwraps them for us on the fly. I'm going to cut the upper palate off, and I'm going to do it along the edge of the teeth. I'm not keen on the way I've separated the palate from the teeth on the inside, so if I control click on an edge, I can rejoin it. And then what I'll do is I will cut the palate off across where the back of the teeth are. I can see some distortion on this UV island, and looks like it's the cavity of the nose, so I'm going to cut that out as well. And I've accidentally rejoined that bridge of the nose, so I need to recut it. And notice that as I connect and disconnect different UV islands, the color coding will change. I've got some distortion around the back of the skull, and splitting this into its separate island will fix this problem. Before I pack the UVs, what I'm going to do is add another subdivision, and this is quick and easy. And notice that when I add the subdivision, all of the new geometry snaps to the high poly model. I have a little bit of cleanup to do. I will just quad this. The next step is to combine these separate UV islands into a single texture map. So I'm just going to unify the UVs and unwrap them. And now you can see that the UV islands are all in a single texture space. I could rearrange this and optimize it and perhaps use the texture space a little better, but for the purposes of this exercise, I think these UVs are pretty good. Now I'm ready to bake, so I am going to go up to the bake menu and go bake with normals. I need to adjust the two shells, so the first one I'm going to adjust is the outer shell. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to set it so that it just about encapsulates all the high poly model. For the inner shell, what I want to do is to make sure that this shell is inside the model. That looks pretty good to me. I click on OK and it comes up with this menu. I'm going to go with the default Unreal settings. If we move over to the paint room, if you select the Vox tree and make sure that the high poly sculpt is hidden, then we can look at the low poly. W on the keyboard will toggle the wireframe view, so we can see that this is the low poly model. I'm happy with this bake, so I'm going to go up to File, Export Object and Textures, and I'm going to select the Unreal Engine 4 option, and this will bring up a long list of texture options. I'm going to set my path, and then I am going to delete those texture options that I don't need. So I'm just going to export the mesh, the base color, and the normal. Unreal has imported the model and the textures for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag my normal map and drop it onto the model. This will create a material for me. And then if I open up the material, I can set the base color to be the file that's just been imported. So I'll set the base color, drop it in, and connect it in. If I select the mesh inside the browser on the main menu, then what I can do is click this little teapot button and it will actually load the skull in so I can see the material on the actual object. Just going to apply the material, and we have a pretty convincing skull model, but it's also well optimized. So that's the process of retopologizing, UV unwrapping, and baking a high poly model in 3D Coat.